This is Douglas Montagna from Grand Valley State University, and I'm here talking with Mr. Francis Scott, who is going to tell us about his experiences during World War II in Europe. I'm going to start by asking, what were you doing before the war?
I was working at AC Sparkplug in Flint, Michigan, living with my folks in Mount Morris. I was working a third shift. I was a job setter, setting up machines to cut threads for aircraft spark plugs.
Okay, so you grew up in the Flint area and went to
That's
school
right.
there?
I went to Mount Morris High School, and I lettered in baseball, track, and football. I was the smallest kid in the class and didn't do that till I was a junior and senior. I was in class plays and operettas. I learned to play a little golf and bowl a little bit with my buddies before I went in service.
Do you remember Pearl Harbor?
Yes.
And what you were doing that day?
I was at my grandmother's house in Genesee having dinner with my family.
And how did you get into the service?
I was drafted in October of 1942. I think I was sworn in on the 16th of October and reported for duty on the 30th at Fort Custer, Michigan.
Okay, just maybe talk a little bit about basic training and the process you went through before you got to Europe.
They took away my clothes at Fort Custer, gave me a shot of tetanus shot in the left shoulder, and they gave me a huge bag of clothes I had to carry, and so that was painful. We got on a train, went out west through the northern part of the country, and down through the Columbia River Valley from Spokane down to Corvallis, Oregon, where I was got off the train and joined a group called the 381st Infantry Regiment. I took a couple of tests that probably governed my career in service there. I took a test for aptitude as a radio operator. I passed it and eventually learned to operate a radio using Morse code. And I also passed high enough that I wound up being sent to college at Washington State College in June of 1943 until March of 1944. So the basic training was kind of interesting. We did phys ed late in the afternoon, and the commander of the intelligence and reconnaissance platoon was a former football coach named Craig, Lieutenant Craig. And the captain of the group was a guy named Francis Chitterington Mandel, who was a third-string quarterback at Notre Dame. And so we played scrub football. And it rained a lot in the wintertime in Oregon. It didn't freeze very much. And so when we fell out for formation, we had to wear a rifle belt with a raincoat folded over it, because we never knew when we were going to put it on. So they started us out learning the alphabet at about 3-4 words a minute. And when you got the alphabet mastered, they kicked up the speed of the code, and you learned to copy with a pencil, because the infantrymen didn't have to carry a typewriter in combat. So when you got up to 14 words a minute, I got classified as a radio operator, and I also fired the Garand rifle, and I have scored sharpshooter. I missed expert by one point. And so the most fun we had was when Lieutenant Craig and I laid down in a prone position at 100 yards, and we each took 4 clips for the ground with 8 shells in it, and we fired all 32 inside of a minute. And we hit the shoulder targets, only missed a couple shots. So that was the most fun I had.
Wow. At this point, did you know that you were going to be part of the invasion of Europe?
No, at that time, the 381st Infantry was just starting, and so they were still fighting in the fighting in the South Pacific, and we knew that there are terrible battles going on, and that I would get letters from home saying that one of my buddies been shot and killed. My family would keep me apprised of that. So I didn't know where I was going to go. Eventually, the 380, I was with headquarters company of the 381st Infantry, which is part of the 96th Division. Eventually, they went to the South Pacific and the Philippines. But I turned 21, and I had to go to the captain to get a permission slip to go to a liquor store and buy a bottle of booze. And I celebrated my 21st birthday at the Golden Pheasant restaurant in a hotel in Corvallis, Oregon, where I had dinner with a nice co-ed I met named Teen. I forget her whole name now, but we danced at USO dances. And I remember they served the steak a little rare, and they had a couple of drinks, and I decided that eating steak rare was better than well done. So I always remember that.
Mm-hmm.
So we also went to Eugene, Oregon. They had a hotel down there, and the band and the co-eds from Eugene, they come and dance at night, and so we would rent a suite with 2 bedrooms and a sitting room and 4 guys, and we go down and dance with the co-eds. And the girl from in Corvallis, that's where Oregon State College is. So let's see. I also learned to eat salads because I was broke. Before payday, I was only getting $50 a month. I got 56 when I was a PFC. And I remember that we had a banjo player who liked to drink and smoke, and he had 2 or 3 kids, so he didn't get much money. So he would go down to the PX and play his banjo and play tunes and get money for beer and cigarettes. And when we'd go to the PX, sometimes if I had money, I didn't like the food like mutton or something, I'd go down and eat some ice cream. And if I didn't have the money for ice cream and was broke, I would just put mint jelly on it and eat the lamb or mutton. So anyway, from there, I should tell you a little bit about the friend soldier named Elmer Ryan, R-H-E-I-N. Elmer was a short, swarthy guy with a bush cut and a big smile on his face and a quizzical look once in a while, like he was not the brightest bulb on the Christmas tree. And he was fascinated by the fact that we had to, once a month, we had to strip down to our raincoats and shoes and have our privates inspected by an officer. Now this was after they showed us a nasty movie about very shankers on the private parts of men. And so Elmer come up with the phrase, "Today, boys, we get the Skinner back in yodel," but standing around at 40-degree temperature in raincoats for 20 minutes is not any fun. So whenever day would come, Elmer would yell this, so he earned the nickname of Skinner. So we had a maneuver one time, shortly after his sweetie from Chicago came to Corvallis and stayed, and they had plans to get married. So on the Wednesday before the Saturday he was going to get married, we were hauled out at night to prowl through the woods of a place called Coffin Butte, which was the habitat of a shrub called poison oak, which is type of thing, for the berries, the leaves, and the stems, if it's exposed to your flesh for a while, will bring out welts and bubbles like poison ivy. So here we are out there with flashlights and a little blackout flashlight and a map, and they have posted signs on trees, various spots through the woods, and there's a heading on the compass. So we'd have to spread out, 15, 20 feet or 30 feet wide, a squad of maybe 8 or 10 men, and find the tree, get the new heading, and away we go. And the small blackout flashlights didn't yield much light, so you couldn't tell much about the foliage. So we got back in at like 3 in the morning, too tired to take a shower, so the guys just flopped in bed, got up in the morning, 6 o'clock, for reveille again. So anyway, Elmer conducted his own short arm inspection on Saturday morning, and he was dismayed to find he was infected with all sorts of little blisters in a very tender spot. So there was a council among his peers, and one of the oversex guys offered him a whole bunch of condoms. Some guys suggested just time would do things, and another guy had had eczema, so he offered him a little salve. And Elmer, dismayed, got on the bus and went into town and got married. And Monday morning, he had no comment. And we had an older guy named 30, who was 38, who was eventually discharged as overage. And he had counseled, just be patient, things will work out. So Elmer joined the married men who went to town 2 nights a week and stayed home 1 at the barracks as a cadre in the case that enemies should land on our shores, and also just to keep somebody there to watch the barracks, and not flood the town with GIs.
Mm-hmm.
And in the morning, the guys who were married, they'd carpool, and they would pull in to the formation at the time when we had to fall out for reveille call. So that, and poor Elmer, later on, that's about the time we started long hikes. We started with like 6 miles, then 12, then 18, and finally, before he got to 26, Elmer was dropping back. He couldn't keep up. He was tired. He went on sick call, and unfortunately for him, fortunately, he found he had a heart problem, and so they discharged him. So Elmer was really sad about it because he enjoyed the camaraderie and being part of the group and doing his bit for the country.
Mm-hmm.
So Elmer didn't write anybody afterwards.
Mm-hmm. So you lost track of him.
Right,
What
we
happened?
lost track of him. But he had a cute little blonde wife. I've learned some new words. One was shack up and shack rats.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned a little bit about camp followers. We had a lieutenant who had just come up from Fort Benning. His name was Buskirk. And I was dancing at the USO Club one night, and there was this good-looking blonde girl, well-built. And I asked her to dance, and we danced quite a bit because she liked the way I danced. And so we got to talking, and she told me, and I told her what company I was in. She asked me if I knew Lieutenant Buskirk. And she said, he's a very good friend of mine. I knew him when I was down at camp, and when he was at Fort Benning. I come up to visit him, And so I mentioned it to the lieutenant, and he said, yep, she's a nice gal, but I tell you what, I'll make you a master sergeant if you take her off my hands. I didn't have the money for that.
Mm-hmm.
I said, I can't afford her.
And this happened while you were training to be a radio operator?
Yeah,
Okay. Oh, okay.
okay.
And then where did you go next after your training in the Pacific
Well,
Northwest?
we moved to Fort Lewis, Washington from Cap Adair. And one night, I run into Rosie the Riveter, no less. There was a girl named Rosie, and two of my buddies and I, we picked up these girls and took them to a movie. And by God, she was a riveter working in a shipyard, and her name was Rosie. So we also saw the beautiful Mount Rainier. And from Fort Lewis, you could look out the window in the morning and see the sun turn the snow pink as it rose at sunrise, and it was a beautiful sight. And at that time, the Army Personnel Office called me down to Division Headquarters and asked me if I wanted to go to college. And I said, well, where? And they told me that the Army was selecting people to learn engineering, and that I was eligible to go because I had passed my, they call AGCT, Army General Classification Test, and I passed that high enough to be eligible. And I'd saved my money before I went in service, and I didn't buy a car until the spring before I was drafted after Pearl Harbor, and because I hoped to save money to go to college. So I accepted it. So I got to make a decision regarding my future. So they sent us to Idaho University in Moscow, and I was there for a week, and they shipped me 9 miles east to Pullman, Washington, to Washington State College. And I told people that I was there 9 months at Pullman, and I told people I spent 9 miles, or 9 months, 9 miles from Moscow.
And you took classes and went to
Oh yeah, we had 40 hours a week. We had labs, took a lot of math classes, physics, chemistry, math. We went from algebra, trigonometry, analytic geometry, differential and integral calculus. So I run into diminishing returns. But I was determined to study and stay out of the infantry because the company, the Lieutenant Craig wanted me to be in his intelligence and reconnaissance platoon, which means we'd be out in front of the infantry regiment snooping at the enemy. And you have 200% casualties in the first month. So the odds of surviving are not the best. So I studied to save my back. And I got to be a platoon lieutenant. And when we finished, I was still in the middle math class. But they had some guys there who had just finished basic training, who were like 18, 19 years old. They weren't mature enough. By this time, I would have been, I was 21. And they dropped out. So the 200 men that started out in A Company in June of 43 wound up down to 90 in March. So the most nice thing about it was that you got to dance with the co-eds, but there wasn't much dancing, no USO club, and the captain at the was ROTC person named Captain Namey. He's a very dour, heavy-set, overweight guy with a blue beard and not unsmiling, and he gigged the whole company one weekend because he found a matchstick on the floor of one of the halls. Instead of confining everybody in the hall, that hall to quarters, he did the whole company. So that was not very much fun. But I lived in a dormitory of 8 men, 4 double bunks, and 4 little rooms with 2 desks and a sort of a common area.
Were you just with other soldiers?
Yeah, there was 200.
Okay.
Okay, so I got to be a lieutenant cadet lieutenant, no money. And I had plastic bars, and I marched my section of 20 men to all the classes all day long and back, and had to stand formation in the morning with them, and 5 o'clock we had formation before we broke for dinner.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that, and we had really good friends. In this 8 group, there was a guy named Henry Van Loon, who's a farmer, dairy farmer from Wisconsin, and a guy named Ahrens, who was a pig farmer from Iowa, and a guy who was a slicker, Johnny Baxter from Kansas City. We had a couple of guys from Michigan. Had a guy named Otmar Schreiber from Chicago. And when we went on furlough, and a guy named Jim Reynolds from Pontiac, and a guy, but one of the most distinguishing persons was Irving Rubenstein from Arizona. Irving had asthma as a youth, and his family moved from east someplace to Arizona, and he was kind of stoop-shouldered. His jaw stuck out. He had a big nose and a big Adam's apple. From his profile, looked like a bird of prey. And he had a swarthy complexion, and he still talked like he needed to blow his nose.
Mm-hmm.
So he discovered the furloughs we had were for 1 week off plus weekend, so it made a total of 9 days. So in September, I got to go home, and I spent 3 days going, 3 days home, 3 days back. So it's a lot of change that had taken place. Gas rationing, food rationing, no nylons, automobiles weren't being built. They had war plants in Flint. They made machine guns, tank parts. They had a tank plant where they used to make Fisher bodies for GM cars, and they made different kinds of engines for vehicles. They had a flathead 6-cylinder engine for half-tracks and trucks, and machine gun parts, anti-aircraft barrels for rifles and machine guns, all that stuff. So anyway, my dad was working, and he was driving my car back and forth to work because he hadn't purchased a car since one of them petered out in the Depression. And he's hauling people back and forth to work. So what I liked mostly was going back to AC spark plug on the 3rd shift, walking through with my uniform and flirting with the girls who were the machine operators.
Mm-hmm.
And I take my dad to work, and he had 3 people to take with him, and we squeeze in. I get the car and run around. And some of the girls I knew worked on the 3rd shift, so I get to visit them in their apartment. But I was kind of shy, so nothing dramatic took place. And but mostly it was home cooking. My mother was a good cook, and it was nice to be with my family.
So this was the 43, 44 school year?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is September of 43.
Okay.
We had another one, we had 3 months term, so early December we did the same thing. Only this time, Jim Reynolds or Otmar or someone bought a 5th of Grand McNish. And we went on the Union Pacific, and they had a lounge car with benches and stuff next to the John. So we, instead of having to sleep sitting up in a railroad car, they had some railroad cars that must have been made in 1910, because they had plush seats that were all faded and grimy and dirty. But there was servicemen galore on it. And so that was a story. To get back, so I had the same kind of furlough, and by this time some of my friends from Mount Morris, little town I was at. There was Dale Hoyt was in the Marines. Ralph Stadler was in the Marines. He was killed. 2 pilots, Don Lamson, Chuck Sullivan, and Jack Lawson was in the Marines.
These were people you knew as a kid.
5 guys I played high school football with. I knew them well. And so right away there are these deaths, you know, and this is all in the South Pacific. Also, I'd like to talk a little bit about the cadre of the 381st. At any rate, in 1941, or 39, they had 189,839 men in the Army. By 1942, they had 3 million in the Army. And these officers, these non-coms, had been privates and making 21 bucks a month. So they got to go to the NCO club, and they told us about the custom and courtesies of the service. And they did a good job of turning civilians into soldiers. I think by 1942, there was, at any rate, at the end of the war, we had a total of 12 million people in service. And the population of the country was only around 120,000 in 1940. So everybody knew somebody in it, and everybody was in the war effort. And everybody had Blue Star Mothers, had a group, and they had blue stars in their hanging in the front of their house, you know, my boys in service, and so it was 100% effort. So, any rate, we had one guy named Sergeant Woodard who drank a little bit, and so one time he got drunk. He was a platoon commander, and he got busted. And the commander of the radio section, platoon sergeant, or section chief of the radio section, was a sergeant. He'd been to Fort Monmouth, Missouri, or New Jersey, and he learned all about the technical aspects of the physics of radio transmission, and he was a good man. The worst guy we had was Dirty George. He was a motor pool sergeant, and he refused to take a bath, and he didn't send his clothes to GI cleaners, and he didn't take his ODs to town to have them dry cleaned. He had black grime around the wrists and around the neck, and his face was greasy and black. His hair was greasy from not washing. So one time I'd been to town in the Corvallis, and I come back on a Saturday night, and we walked through where the wire section and the motor pool people were, and I heard this yelling and screaming and cussing. We walked inside, and there was 6 guys are in the John in the shower with George, and they're holding him, and they have GI soap and brushes, and they're giving him a good bath, washing his hair. And the first sergeant was in on it, and he had come with the clean clothes from the supply sergeant, and he took the old clothes and he cut the stripes off them so that Dirty George could put them on his new clothes. And so we watched for a while, and one of the hangers-on picked up the dirty clothes and took them outside and stuck them in a trash barrel and burned them. So I didn't stay around long enough to find out if Dirty George ever took a bath, because this is before I left, but he was more fun to sit by in the mess hall. So, but most of all, I would say that the leadership that they selected and the bright guys who could handle people, there were some jerks who got to be corporals and sergeants, but they were, they would trip over their own feet and be busted. But they wound up with pretty good servicemen. So I'd like to comment on that. Okay, I have to go back to Rubenstein. When we had the furloughs, he found out that to go from Pullman, Washington down to Arizona, there's no way he could go through Idaho and Nevada and down to Arizona. He had to go over to the coast, go to Portland or and then down the coast, Southern Pacific to LA and over. And it was very expensive, and you'd only have about 18 hours at home because there's so many layovers. So he decided to go to Vancouver, British Columbia. So while he was there, he checked into a hotel and was exploring the area. It's a beautiful spot and interesting town. So he made the acquaintance of the elevator operator, and a little romance started. And so he come back with a picture of her and told us about he walked in the park with her and they did this and they did that, you know. And so he kept writing her. And just before Christmas, he asked her if she would buy him some stationery for Christmas, because he could write her then. And at the top he wanted a phrase, "Nothing happens unless first a dream," and his name down below. Well, when the stationery arrived, nothing happened, but first a dream was in big letters, you know, not quite a quarter of an inch. And Irving Rubenstein was in tiny letters. He was furious. And so he wrote a sort of bitter letter condemning her for lack of taste and inability to follow directions, you know. And she replied with an equally stinging letter, and the romance was over. Okay, so Irving was upset. He was pretty sad. So, being frugal, he went to the drafting department and borrowed a pen and a big bottle of ink. And the pen has two little prongs that stick down, and you put the drop of ink between and you draw it along. So he spent patiently hours, several nights, patiently blotting out. Nothing happens until first a dream and all 100 sheets. Okay? So he was still kind of grim and unhappy. But one night, after lights out, one of the characters disguised his voice in our 8-man dorm, and he goes, "Nothing happens unless first a dream." Duh! And everybody roared in laughter, and Rubenstein laughed, and finally he got over his busted romance. So that was one of the humorous things that happened. So let's see, let's stop for a minute and let me check up.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, I'll go ahead. Ready to go? Okay, so at Washington State College, they told us we would be future officers when we started. And we would probably wind up doing civil engineering, fixing roads, bridges, running the railroad section, you know, and helping with a power plant or whatever in the Army of Occupation. And so this sounded like a good deal because you get to be an officer and you get to look nice and you get to tell people what to do and you make money. And you get experience, you know. So it looks like you have a decent career. And finally, toward the end, in winter of '44, there was a big buildup in England for the D-Day. And so they finally message comes through that at the end of March, the program would be terminated. Some really bright kids, or students, there must have been some older guys, maybe 12 or 15 of them, with really high IQs. They persuaded them to go to medical school. And when I look back on it, I think that part of the program was to subsidize the colleges to keep the professors and the staff sort of intact, and to kind of keep the cumulative brain power on uprise, and train people for the future of the country. Because once you got through basic training, you go to unit training, then you go on maneuvers, you know, and in most units. So when I joined the 11th Armored Division in March of 44, they had just come off desert maneuvers. But to get back to how you survive, is they have a term called field expedience. And I learned right away when I was in Oregon that when we went out on maneuvers, we went in the forest and the coastal ranges, they had unusual moss. It was about 3/4 to an inch thick, and it was little blades of moss that were compacted, and you could take a jackknife or your bayonet, cut it off in huge strips that went on all the way around the trees, whole trunk, and you could lay it on the ground, a couple layers of it, so you have a nice cushion to sleep on. Also, one time when I was at Adair with 96, we were assigned to roadblock. They were doing artillery exercises, and a bunch of roads that were there before the Army took over this several square miles of property, and we had to go there and keep civilians from going down this road. So we had a little roadblock there, and it was old school that had been abandoned, like a one-room school, and this was the days before the historical societies. So we looked over, I went in there, and we had a Jeep, and we had a pickaxe and an axe on it, and we saw there was a fire pit. So short, and we could see portions of floorboards. So we went into school, and lo and behold, half the floorboards were gone. So we helped get rid of the rest of them. And we would burn the things in half and put them on the fire, and then we kept warm. And it was kind of boring, you know. So, and we had for lunch, we had, of course, bologna sandwiches, you know, and we had a canteen full of water. And so we finally persuaded someone to give us some instant coffee. So we put our canteen cup over there, heat some water from a canteen, and have a little coffee. But those are two things I learned about field expedience. So I didn't realize I'd be doing a lot of that when I was overseas.
And when did you finally end up going overseas?
Well, I wound up going overseas in September of 44. Before that, I joined, when I joined the radio section in the 11th Armored Division at Camp Cook, California. I was fortunate enough to go to Los Angeles a couple times. One time I persuaded a gal who would come up to a dance at our company one time. She invited me down for a weekend, and I bought tickets to Porgy and Bess, a really wonderful show in downtown Los Angeles. And I also had a former school teacher who had a brother who was a writer for Disney, and I talked to her when I was home on furlough, and she gave me her brother's phone number, and he took me through Disney Studios. and I saw Fantasia before it was even on in the theaters. So that was interesting. And the interesting thing about going to Los Angeles was that you could get a 3-day pass. So one time, Bob Faith, my best buddy there, and we got a Wednesday morning pass, and it was for 3 days. So you had a Class A pass that was good from noon until Saturday until 6 o'clock Monday. So you check into a hotel, we went to dances at Santa Monica Pier and saw Harry James and Betty Grable, all that stuff. Danced with would-be movie stars, gals with agents, trying to make it, and go to the beach of Santa Monica and look at the beautiful ladies. And so on the way back, we were hitchhiking in, and we run into some guys from our company who had wives in Los Angeles. And so there was room for us. There was just 2 of them. And so we're driving along. Just before we get into Oxnard or someplace, there's a arroyo, a little valley that goes into the ocean, a little creek or something. So there's a road up the side. So we drove up this road and stopped. I wasn't driving, and these guys opened up the trunk and they produced 2 GI gas cans with 5 gallons in it each. Somehow they persuaded somebody from the motor pool to give them the GI gas, which was illegal. So to hide their theft, they just tossed the GI gas can as far as they could down this little canyon. So I later learned that when I was on guard duty, we had a lot of fog at Camp Cook. Come in at night, wouldn't leave until 10 in the morning. And I would be stationed as far away from the motor pool as possible. And that I suspect that the guys who lived in town with their wives were using GI gas to get back and forth. But who knows? It was an undetected crime. So on the way back, we met these guys, and both of them had been drinking. One guy was named McDonald, one guy's name was Lenny Malis, both good guys. And they were whipped. They'd been partying with their wives. So they, Scotty, do you feel like driving? Well, I'd had a couple of drinks earlier in the day, but I was sober. And Faith said he didn't want to drive. He was tired. So I started up Highway 101, get up by Santa Barbara, and all of a sudden, fog you could not believe rolled over the highway. And it was like you walked into cotton. So white knuckle time. So I prowled along at low rate of speed. So from about 11 o'clock in the morning and that evening till about 5 o'clock in the morning before we got into camp. And so I thought, sure, I was going to kill myself. The worst time, one of the worst times of my life. So also I think I had too many pre-dinner drinks. And I had tension. I went up with a slight case of alcoholic gastritis for the week. Food didn't taste very good till about Friday. So those are some of the adventures you have when you're there. I went on furlough in June, and this was a 14-day furlough. And when I got to Michigan, out of Chicago, I changed trains, took Southern Pacific into Union Station. And what you notice is that the atmosphere the smells of the foliage and the hay and the fields and everything, it's different than California. Right away you know you're home. And that was interesting. So I had a good time on the furlough, and it was a little sad when I left. My grandmother, my aunt, my 3 sisters who were there out of the 4, and my mom and dad come down to the railroad station, because this was right after D-Day, and we knew things were going to go. We figured that island hopping with tanks is not much fun. Be more likely to go to Europe. And so it was kind of sad. My dad cried. First time I've seen him cry in a long time. And I had gotten around by doing, I still drove around the car, but I had to mix regular gas with stove gas, which is a low octane, a little bit above kerosene. And when you put it in your car, the engine knocks. And the acceleration is slow. And the interesting thing is that it emits huge clouds of black smoke, like the engine is shot, you know. But still, I got around and visited my friends. But I didn't make any big connections with dates. At that time, I was writing one girl there, and I wrote a girl named Phyllis Morrison I met at Washington State College. And I kept in correspondence for many years. But I didn't, thought of myself as a homeboy, and I wasn't confident in myself to say I'm going to go out to Washington State and court this girl, find a job there, and marry her after the war. I just didn't have the self-confidence to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So, any rate, I got the funniest letter I ever had in my life, because my older sister, Charity, had been divorced and had been working with a friend of hers at a army base in Tennessee, and she met a GI, and he had moved someplace, and the girlfriend's husband had moved out, so she came back to live with my folks, and she kept writing this guy. His name was Willard Hoffman, and my younger sister was engaged to a guy who was a metallurgist at Buick Motor Company, and he had designed a special metal to with various types of alloys that improved the armor protection of tank destroyers. And so he had a deferment. So, anyway, after I got back, about 2 or 3 weeks, I got this letter from my dad that Mr. Sergeant Hoffman busted into town and insisted that he marry my sister Charity, and they made arrangements, and my sister Marion decided to marry Walt, so they had a double wedding. The only kicker is that my dad and my other sister Jeanette and her husband Johnny were up north near Grayling, camping in a state campground trout fishing. So they got the state police, or they called the local grocery store up there near Grayling, and someone come and told them about the wedding. So they got to the wedding dressed in nasty old dirty camp clothes and smelling of trout, fish, and they got to the reception in the hall of the lawn of the church, and it was the funniest letter my dad ever sent me. I wish I'd kept it. So anyway, the marriages lasted 50 years, so it was a good deal. So that's about the adventures I had that summer.
Mm-hmm.
In the fall, we took a train across the country and went through the San Francisco, Denver, and Rio Grande. Went through some beautiful gorges in the mountains of Colorado. And they'd make us fall out when the train was stopped by other regular passenger trains or freights and was on a siding. If there was a field, we'd get out and do calisthenics. And we ate on the train. So we wound up at Camp Kilmer, New Jersey, which is just outside of Princeton. It's not too far from the Pennsy. And so it's a quick trip up to New York. So the interesting thing there was that they had German POWs doing KP. And they were getting fat. They'd been starved in Germany because things were so bad there. So we went to Diamond Dance joint and saw St. Patrick's Cathedral and RCA building and all that stuff. Usual tourist stuff. Mm-hmm. And then we entered the world of the blackout. At Camp Adair, they marched us out one night, our whole regiment, and they split us up on about a mile away on a couple of slopes in a little valley, and then they kept lighting matches and clicking bolts in the gun and banging spoons on mess kits to show you how far sound will travel at night in the dark when it's absolutely quiet. And we were far enough away from town that there was no, it was overcast, but there was no light shining up on the bottom of the clouds to illuminate the area, just pitch black. And they had a little bitty flashlights, and we marched back in. So that was something that you learned, that you would have to be careful when you're at night in enemy area, because you'd be subject to being discovered if there was a scouting and patrolling action by the enemy, and if you were even behind a line someplace and they could hear you, they could probably drop a mortar shell in the area. And it was interesting because later on I noticed that we at night when we were in combat, you'd pull into a town and they'd kick the Germans out of their house with a building party. They'd say, you guys get to stay here, you know, and then you have to figure out if there's a John there, or whether they're going to dig a latrine, and then figure out where the mess hall is, and then you have your radio to worry about too. Find that in the middle of the night when you're changing shifts. So on the trip, we left the Brooklyn Navy Yard at night, and on the HMS Samaria, English ship. And next morning, we're out off Cape Cod, and you see ships as far as you can see on the horizon. One of the biggest convoys ever to leave, and this is in, I think, September 30th of '44. And they gave us some smoked fish for breakfast, which is not my cup of tea. Now, I've learned to like smoked trout and smoked smoked salmon, but not smoked kippers. And so I think I went to the PX on the ship and bought some cookies and some sort of a ginger ale, English ginger ale. And so that was my diet when I didn't like the food. Mm-hmm. And at night, you go up on deck, no smoking. The moon would be out, you could see where if the whole convoy was turning, you could see by the wakes of the ships. And there were baby flat tops, destroyer escorts, destroyers, every place you could see. And all you would see is once in a while the signal lights that where they send Morse code by dots and dashes. When the light is channelized, you know, and so probably complete radio silence, and you just knew that around you that there was American submarines, and that once in a while you'd see a plane pop off the baby flat top, checking on something. But it was an uneventful trip.
Mm-hmm. How did you have a sense of how the war was going in Europe?
Yes.
Were you confident?
We knew by then that they had busted through in the summer. We knew that they busted through at St. Lo, and they were in the eastern part of France.
Mm-hmm.
And they were still fighting, and they liberated Paris. We knew that.
Mm-hmm.
And we also knew of the casualties of D-Day.
Mm-hmm.
And we were fatalistic, is that you can't control everything, and that your life is controlled. And actually, when you're a young person and you're in your late teens and early 20s, you're making decisions about careers, marriage, girlfriends, avocations, and things like that. And you postpone career decisions. Everything is on hold, and the Army takes over. So you have a sense of freedom when you leave camp with a 3-day pass, or just a Sunday when you get on a train and go into London and look around and come back.
Mm-hmm.
So you are away from your GI duties, but it's a sense of freedom, and you're postponing these decisions, so that the tension level is there because of being in the service, and people telling you what to do, and being on KP, you know, and whatever, and being on guard duty, and telling the first sergeant, look, you got me on guard duty, you know, 3 weeks apart, you know. There's other guys, you know, I want to go to town, you know, so when you take me off, you know.
Mm-hmm.
The same way with KP, you know. If your name comes up too much, you tell the first sergeant, how come you're assigning me that, you know? Can't you read the other guys' names there, you know? I just did that 2 weeks ago, now I'm on again, you know? I don't want to do that.
Would they listen to you?
Sure,
Okay.
sure, you know.
And then how long were you in England before you went to?
Well, we were there October 12th until December 19th or 20th. So the interesting thing was in England was we had all our machine guns and submachine guns and things like that. We had them packed in cosmoline, which is a heavy grease. And so we found some big cast iron tubs that you would normally use to shave a pig, you know, and we heated with hot water and with wood and stuff, and dipped these machine guns and weapons and other things that were, and it was designed not to get them corroded by salt air. So there's boxes and boxes. They had all sort of plastic wrap of some sort around it. Actually, it was overdone.
Mm-hmm.
Some was unnecessary, I thought. So anyway, we unloaded those, and then also we had a half track assigned to us. I don't know whether it was one we had from California. I think it was a different one. I think they left those there and had shipped other ones for a radio, and we got that going. And then they had we built boxes on the back with little pieces of angle iron and rods and plywood to put extra rations and bedrolls and things like that. So we had 2 boxes in the back of the half-track. So also, the motor pool department, they had welders, and somehow or other they found 1/4-inch armor plate. And one of the lieutenants, Lieutenant Kalsovic, who was not the most popular guy in the world, he had his Jeep so loaded with armor plate that it's a wonder it even moved. Well, actually, in the armor division, you call them peeps instead of Jeeps. So we did the usual things, went to the Stonehenges, saw those. We were on what they call a Salisbury Plain. Went to Bath and went to the Roman baths, drank that 69 at the bar. Talked to the girls in Bristol who worked in the cigarette factories and danced the hokey pokey with the English girls. Met some of them in town. There were girls girls from
This tape is,
English. We're well aware of it. We're also well aware of the fact that the Germans had been disguised in American uniforms, and they had found a weak part in our lines in the Ardennes forest. And we loaded up and drove to Weymouth, England. We were, there we boarded the LST 510. So we sailed across the channel and got into Cherbourg Bay around 6:30, something like that. We just finished chow, and I was down on the tank deck where our half-track was. They had an elevator that I didn't know about, and they had put some of the vehicles on the top deck by pushing them up this big elevator and last in there to get more equipment. So all of a sudden, general quarters sounded, which is a honking, vibrating, loud noise. But not until after we heard this terrible screeching and wrenching sound of metal on metal. What had happened is that the captain and the port commander couldn't agree on where to beach, so they told him to back up the ship. So remember that the ship changed direction, and after it changed direction, this noise happened. So what had happened is that we later learned that it was high tide, and there was a sunken hulk with superstructure there, and they tore out some plates in the bottom of the boat. It happened to be where the engine room is. So luckily, they had compartments. So they closed these big doors and bolted them in place, you know. So the water stayed in there, but the lights went out, and there's just some auxiliary batteries. So we ordered to the top deck, and we were told we're going to go over the side, and they have what they call LCVPs, which is landing craft vehicle personnel. So it's probably maybe a 40-foot, 45-foot long, and wide enough to get a couple of Jeeps on, or peeps, and we have a cargo net on the side. The ship had started to list a little bit to one side. So there was 6 to 8 foot swells in the harbor. So you look down there and you see guys are climbing down the cargo net, and they're jumping into these boats. And it's going to be your turn. So in the meantime, I got my sleeping bag, my carbine, some cigarettes, and a writing paper kit. So, and of course you have your mess gear and your canteen on your rifle belt. So down we go, and you look down there and see that baby come up, and you say, now. So miraculously, I don't know how many of the 293 people in our company was on that ship, but nobody broke a leg. So we landed on the beach, and son of a gun, they have lights on there because the German army was concentrating on the Bulge, and they were short of petrol. In England, we'd been worried about the buzz bombs. And it was still blackout conditions. And driving in the GI trucks into to a dance was an adventure with the narrow roads and the curves. But we, as young guy, you gotta have faith in your mechanics and faith in your driver. So anyway, there was another LST there, so we went on that, slept for the night. Next morning, lo and behold, the 510 was parked next to our, the one we slept on, and they run some power cables over to the motors that did the bow doors and the loading ramp. And the water had receded to low tide, so after Navy chow, we went down and wound up the vehicles, turned the crank on the engine, and drove off. So we went to a gasoline dump several miles away, and we were told to get out and watch the area, and until we were told to do otherwise. It's a crew of mine. So there were several crews around. The thing was probably at least 40 acres, maybe, or more. Nothing but gasoline cans with 5-pound gasoline cans with trails through. So there was a farmhouse, and I was stationed near the farmhouse. And all of a sudden, this big car comes up and has a beautiful gal and a swarthy guy in a raincoat, or a top coat, you know, a beret. And she's, 30, he's 40s or so. They want to talk to the commander. So there's a lieutenant or a captain in this farmhouse, So they go in there, and they stay for probably 45 minutes, have a conversation, and captain comes out and says, well, see if you can help this guy load about 5 or 6 cans of GI gas. And so he says, he claims he was in the Marquis. That's after they left. The lieutenant says, this guy claims he was in the Marquis. So he said, I couldn't do anything but believe him, And so that was kind of interesting. So on the way, we kept going toward Paris, and went through Paris. When we got to the other side of Paris, we stopped in a place called, I think it was Sisson. Anyway, we slept on the street. It's colder than hell. And so you had your sleeping bag, you had your raincoat underneath you, and your sleeping bag, you took your shelter, your three-quarter GI coat, you bundled that around the top of your sleeping bag, you put your field jacket around your feet, and you put the shelter half over you, and you take seats out of the half track with sponge rubber in them, and lay them on the ground to get you a little cushion. So you can sleep for about 4 or 5 hours, and it's cold, so your pores of your body close up, and your bladder fills up. And you talk about bladder pain, that's it. So I got up, and I said, I'm not going to sleep out here anymore. So I rolled my sleeping bag up and my stuff. I went in the half track. Sparta was laying across the front of the car, front seats. He's a driver. Sparta, I said, I'm freezing. Start this sucker up. So Sparta was ingenious. So he had taken some big lard cans, and he loosened the nuts and bolts on the exhaust manifold, and he made a chute to come back under the car alongside the exhaust pipe, and there was a grill in the firewall that had about this wide and about this tall, had slots about this big. So you move this just so, and air can come in there. And so the fan of the motor come in across the front of the scoop on the lard can and blew air in there.
Pretty clever.
Huh?
Pretty clever.
So here we had a half track with a heater in it.
Mm-hmm.
So that warmed us up. And so we stopped. I knew a little French, and there's these two peasant guys with their berets and their sabots over toward, on the way to Bastogne, and wife, and they come out and they talk us a little bit about, il fait froid aujourd'hui, and all this stuff, it's cold, So I give them a little French back and told them I know un petit peu.
Mm-hmm.
And so finally they brought the smallest shot glass you ever saw. And they said, asked if we'd have like a drink. I said, sure. So they got eau de vie, water of light,
Mm-hmm.
brandy.
Mm-hmm.
And so all the guys in the crew had a shot. And they talked about liberate. And what they did is when they knew the Germans were coming, they took all their wine and they dug up the rose bushes and planted it under the rose bushes. So I thought that was kind of cool. So that was my first introduction to anybody French. We went through Paris, went right down the Champs-Élysées and the Boulevard de la Victoire and by the Lac de Triomphe, and at a carnival in the middle of the street and the lights on. And it was sort of like telling the Germans, you sons of bitches are not going to get her by Christmas like you said, and we're going to celebrate the hell with you.
Mm-hmm.
That was the attitude you got.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was kind of cool.
And when were you in Paris? Was this
We
in
probably
December?
about the 23rd, 22nd, somewhere around there.
Of December?
Yeah.
Okay.
A couple days after we got off the, because we went something like 500 miles from Cherbourg to Longlier before we went into Bastogne.
And you're going to help out the Americans in the Battle of the Bulge?
Yeah.
That's where you're, okay.
Yeah. So we had Christmas, and they had all the trimmings, about 20 miles from Bastogne. Hot meal,
Mhm.
a whole schmear. And we knew that guys were getting shot up and killed over there. So we went into Bastogne on the 30th of December. Some of our units were committed the day before, but we went into Bastogne on the 30th of December. They had opened the road 1,000 yards on each side of the highway. 88 shells zoom over the half track. And the German guns, they had to pick up the back to traverse them. American guns had a swivel. You could go 15, 20 degrees each way. So when they try to shoot at moving targets, it's hard to know when to pull the trigger. So the shells went over the half track, and you look out and you see there's a little slot on the side of the door, which is all metal. And you look at the little slot there and you see the shells hit the ground and knock up the dirt and the snow. So we're in a barracks in a Belgian army barracks, and the first thing you see is before you get to a room is several rooms full of articles of clothing, personal effects, and blankets and barracks bags belong to soldiers who were on leave or dead or wounded. And some soldiers from the 101st Airborne are guarding. And so we persuaded them to give us each a couple of blankets because we were freezing. The sleeping bag was too thin. So we had some thread and we sewed them around. So you have triple layers some places, or four or five layers. So But that was sobering, to know that your buddies had died, even though they weren't particular friends of yours, but just American soldiers dying. So we went into a radio park and started operations, and we were monitoring a neighboring 4th Armored Division in the area. And anyway, the guys started fighting, and then the next thing we did was they dropped mortar shells in on us, but we weren't too worried because they triangle you when you transmit. Put 2 receivers, get an angle on it, directional finders, drop the mortars. We spread out more, and we weren't worried because the reports we got, the Germans were being pushed back. So we weren't too worried about that. The next thing we did in the Battle of the Cold was unique. We were in a pine tree planting, and we're in a Conestoga sort of thing for the night. And there was a pile of rocks that the farmers pull out of the field. Frost brings them up. So we dug a trench, enough for 3 guys to lay in. And we dug it about over 2 foot deep, threw rocks in the bottom, went and got deadfalls, dead branches on the bottom of pine tree plantings, threw them in there and built a fire. And then we took our axe and went out there, and it was on the vehicle, and along with a shovel, and we got green boughs. And when the fire went out, the rocks were hot, threw the green boughs on there, and 3 guys slept in there, 2 guys slept in a half track.
How far were you from the front at this time?
Oh, probably 4 or 5 miles, because we were assigned to Division Field Artillery Headquarters, and that was located in the 2nd element of the main body of troops. So you had an armored column, you had tanks and a cavalry recon and a platoon of tanks and a couple platoons of infantrymen as a point. And then you had tanks and infantrymen again, and we were the 2nd element. And behind us were 2 battalions of 105 howitzers mounted on medium tank chassis. So the object was to wheel off the road and get our flivver planes to spot a target, or forward observers to give the coordinates of the target and see if it was important. And we get orders to take this out, and then they would fire a white phosphorus, and the flivver plane would mark it on the map and give it new coordinates, and then they'd get another white phosphorus pretty close to it, and they'd give the coordinates to maybe 2 or 3 batteries, or sometimes battalion volley, and high explosive, so many rounds, and they would saturate the area. So our job was to take these messages from division headquarters and to send messages back to division headquarters, or to contact our unit was called Combat Command A, or B, and we had Combat Command A and Combat Command C and Cavalry Reconnaissance. We were in what we call the G3 net, which is the command net. They have another network for G4 would be supply, and G2 would be intelligence. But they didn't need intelligence, particularly at Division Field Artillery Headquarters. They needed it at the battalion headquarters of the armored artillery and of the tanks and the cavalry recon. So we were on 24 hours a day. So I was a new man in the crew. We had 5 men. There was Sergeant Bob Overbeck was the chief sergeant, the senior operator was Aldo Persiani, and the other operator was Frank Saliba, a Maltese, and myself. So I got the crappy shift. I got to operate the radio from midnight to 3 in the morning. So you get up in the, first you got up in the middle of the night, and you go out, and the guy will wake you up, get your clothes on out of your sack, go sit in the back of the half track, and we had a blanket over one of the ribs, between the front seat and where the radio was in back, and we got a seal beam headlight on a board with a toggle switch plugged into the cigarette lighter. So we had light in there. So you have to turn the light off when you get out, in and out. And then once every 15 minutes, every hour, you turn on the engine of the radio to keep the battery up. We never got the radio, the battery dead once during the whole time we're in combat. We never run out of gas. So later on, and I don't think I only took a couple messages at night, but we had to be there because if the generals or if somebody decided to do something, you had to be there. And sometimes if we stayed one place very long, the wire section run wires to all these headquarters units so they could talk back and forth. The generals and the lieutenant colonels and the colonels, all these commanders could yak back and forth. And they had switchboard operators at division rear and division forward, and they were in contact with wire to Corps headquarters and Army headquarters. And we had message center vehicles, and they would run from one unit to another with dispatches for the plan for the next day. So we weren't necessary, but the busiest day we ever had was on the other side of the Rhine, east side of the Rhine. We were in a valley, and there was a little butte, a rounded piece of ground that rose maybe 150 feet, like a dune. It was rounded. So it had a slope on one side, and the enemy was on the high side. So we pulled all our tanks up there, and you fire from what you call a defilade position. They can't see you. And we had problems with CCA was trying to reach division, and their signal strength was like 2 and 3, which is minimal. It's supposed to be 5 by 5. Signal strength is 5, it's clear 5. So we put up extra sections of antenna. Instead of having 3, we put up 7. And you tie cords to the ground, keep them up. And so we went in and interrupted and said, check signal strength, and we come in 5 by 5 to CCA and to rear. So we said, we will relay. So we had 2 guys copying, 1 guy sending. So we did that for probably 3-4 hours one afternoon. That's probably the busiest we were. But it was vital, and it helped doing what they wanted to do. So eventually what we did is we found a junction box so that you could plug in a speaker and a leg key tube. So we got wire from the wire section and some more contacts from radio repair, and we would run we would run a wire from the plug-in on the radio from the transmitter into a house and run it into to the junction box, and we run a wire from the speaker, speaker plug in the house to the speaker in the house, and with a volume control on it. So then we'd pull the vehicle up next to a house, and we'd be comfortable. And then we're talking about field expedience and making comfort. Our buddy Sparta had a pair of tin snips. And so when we got across the Siegfried line, we run into a bombed out house, had one good room in it. So we also found a stove there and some stovepipe. So Sparta broke out a window, cut a piece of lard can, whatever he had behind the thing, put it in the broken window, put a piece of stovepipe up, put elbow in, stovepipe out, elbow up. And we took the pickaxe and the hatchet and the axe, went upstairs and bombed out part of the house, tore up the floorboards, beat it up, built a fire. And then, what happens then? Our messengers are from our company, so they bring us coffee. We find a coffee pot. They bring us condensed cream, GI bread, preserved butter, and marmalade. So there was a straw stack near there, and we got one of the guys from Divardi at a Jeep to go and get several piles of straw, put on the floor at one end of the room, run a longer wire from the cigarette lighter with another, we built a framework for the another steel beam headlight, and we stole the toggle switch from some house, and so we had put on a desk with a light there. You can run the thing. Also, you can warm up your coffee and keep the fire going and fight the cold, the enemy.
This is still like January and February,
Yeah,
45.
yeah,
Okay,
March.
freezing, yeah, even March, yeah.
So that was field expedience. So we took that old stove, and we had extra wire, and there's a big roller on the front of the half track. We'd place it on there with a stovepipe, tie it all on there, and go down the road. We had the junkiest half track in the Army, but we were warm, and we had coffee.
Any pictures of that half tracks? Any pictures of that half track?
I can't find one though. I have a picture of the half track, but not the coffee. I got a picture of the crew. Yes. So, let's see. Oh, I was going to tell you some statistics about the Battle of Bulge. It probably was. Anyway, it was the biggest battle in the history of mankind. The Germans had 550,000 troops. They lost an estimate of 120 people, 120,000. This was because they ran out of gasoline, and what they did is they brought all those people in to the area on trains, and then they got horses to haul the equipment out in the field because they had no gas. So the commanders were determined to do what the Führer and the high command said. So they held their ground and got killed. We had superior power. Okay, so anyway, we had 500 or 50,000 English troops, 450,000 U.S. troops, and we only had 19,000 men killed and 61,000 wounded, and of those, a third of them, or about 17 to 20,000, had frostbite. So those are statistics that if somebody sees this later on, anybody ever uses it, they have a little basis to see what happened. Also, the movement of American troops from our country to England and Europe was the most massive, largest migration of people in the history of man. So I think that's kind of interesting
Oh, yeah.
statistic.
Yeah. It's like the convoy you talked about. You could see as far as the eye could see.
Right. So anyway, let me get on here, page 3. So, anyway,
We only have half an hour left, so make sure you get to the.
okay, I'm getting it right now. I got one more story here. We went to a little town of Raconia, just outside of Belgium, outside of Bastogne for about 10 days. And we stayed in a couple rooms upstairs. It was a pastoral village with a cow barn next to the house. And the heat from the manure and the animals helped warm it. They had an old farm-type stove with a reservoir for water. And so we got hot water after about maybe 3-4 weeks of combat. And we got take a sponge bath in our helmet liner. And the ladies washed our clothes. So we had extra underwear and stuff stuffed in these seats and a half track. And so they washed our GI uniforms, and also we found some red, sort of orange parachute silk. And we cut that up and wore around our necks to keep the soil of our body off the collar so it wouldn't get irritated. I wore that until the end of the war. So the other guys.
Wow.
So anyway, while we were there, we didn't do anything on the radio for a whole hour or for a whole week. And then when they finally checked in, all stations answered. So they all been sitting there for a week doing nothing, but being ready in case. Like, you know, who knows, the Germans come in and cut all the wire someplace, you know. They didn't, but we were there. So anyway, also, just when we got across the Maginot, the Siegfried line, we went to a town called Trois Verges, which means 3 virgins, I guess. Anyway, it's warmed up a little bit, and Al Persiani found a beat-up old accordion. And by using condensed milk, pieces of cloth, pieces of wood, and paper, we patched up the bellows and plugged the bases that were broken, and he made music. And we were there for about 4 or 5 days, and we got special service to send us some music, and one of the tunes was called "What a Difference a Day Makes." I always remember that, first time I ever heard it. Okay, so finally, when he busted through to the Rhine, that was important. And it shows right here that we went in 56 hours. So here we go to Andernach and Brol. And it shows March 3rd to 6th, not too far from Prüm. Went through Prüm, and no, there's no civilians there. And all the walls of the town were knocked down except for a couple. And the road was bulldozed over the rubble of the mortar. So from the 3rd until the 9th, 6 days, we went over 50 miles to the Rhine. Now we stayed there for a while, and finally we went south and east on the 17th of March to a town called Bulge. And we crossed on a pontoon bridge, which is an awesome thing to see. It has these big, huge donuts, crosswise, full of air, and it has lines and lines, you wouldn't believe, to the shore, and they're anchored on the edges of, and then they have these huge troughs that interferes, so that when we got on this thing, there were tanks, trucks, half-ton trucks, jeeps, driving in front of us, and they're bouncing up and down. And you sit there and say, my God, is this gonna hold? and the first thing you know, you're across the thing. And it seemed like it was like a half a mile across, when it's only less than a quarter mile. It was a wide river, the Moselle. And we could see on the red soil and the vineyards on the north side of the Moselle. So we no more got across the Moselle, and on the right side, there was an MP motioning us like this. So we pulled up in front of a wine warehouse, and there was GIs there with dollies and 4 cases of wine. I'm standing in the turret on the right side of the truck. I said, boys, we have a treat. So we got 3 cases of Sour Moselle dry wine and a case of sparkling Burgundy. So they went behind the seats of the half-track. And that was a real treat. And Sergeant rationed it off half a canteen cup before supper.
And what were your normal rations like?
Oh, we had GI food, and they had cooked breakfast, eggs in the morning, toast, coffee. Sometimes we had powdered eggs, and sometimes they made French toast. And for supper, we had a meal, and we had huge GI cans with gasoline heaters in them. When you finish, you warm it up in the rinse when you go in, get your get it hot, then you put it in go through dinner, and when you get through, come back and put it in the soap, then put it in the rinse, and you're all done. So most of the time, you're far enough behind the lines, you can the light you have is from the burning gasoline in the stoves. And they pick them up and put them in the truck and move on the next day. So they're doing that while we're fighting. Okay, we got to get into the action here. Okay, when we captured something like 10,000 troops here, when we went to the Rhine, when we come down here, back to the Rhine here at Worms, we captured 17,000. We finally crossed the Rhine at Oppenheim and kept going up here. And when we got up to Oberhof, it was a resort town, and we had burned down a hotel. And when we were built into a hotel next to it, we discovered steps among the smoldering timbers to a wine cellar. So we carefully selected after dinner drinks and a few esoteric wines from Romania and Portugal.
And you'd finish that wine you've gotten.
No,
you still had
this
that.
time we had to get rid of 2 cases of sea ration to make room for them. So we carefully stuck them inside our field jackets so no one knew we had them. And then we finally told the chaplain in front of us, who is a good guy, that we discovered this, and maybe the officers in need would like to help themselves. So anyway, we also discovered across the Rhine, we discovered slave laborers for the first time.
Were you expecting to see stuff like that, or were you surprised by what you saw?
No, we knew, we'd heard about it, but there's just like an OCC camp, you know, dozen, 3 dozen women living there, and they go out in the fields and work. So let's see, what else is interesting happened? Oh, at Worms, we were in a Conestoga wagon sort of thing. Just before my 23rd birthday. I got Christmas on my 23rd birthday. On March 23rd, my grandmother sent me donuts, and they finally caught up with me. So we had donuts for breakfast, the crew did. And also, one night, a German convoy with supplies come alongside our position, and the guys opened up on them and killed them all. So we wake up in the middle of the night to screaming horses. Next day, the chaplain did an inventory and found lard, flour, and sugar, and he took it to a bakery in Worms and made a trade-off with the baker. They also found a warehouse with frozen cherries and strawberries. And so 2 nights later, we are treated to strawberry pie and cherry pies. And the baker got to distribute some bread to the starving Germans.
The German population was on the verge of starvation.
Oh yeah, they were hurt. So that's what happened there. Okay, so I want to get down to the atrocities. Okay, so in the morning, you get up in the morning, go to breakfast. They tell you we're going to move out at 7 o'clock. So you go back, get your sleeping bag and cigarettes and whatever, and climb in a half track. They'd say wind them up, and away you go. So you go down the road, and you stop when you have a problem. So you sit there with the light, with the engine off, and if I had managed to switch my shift from 3 to 6 in the morning, I complained. So my sleep wasn't broken up, but I was sleepy and had burning eyes for months. So anyway, this was an average day. And sometimes we would stop for 2 or 3 days while the intelligence decided where we wanted to go next, and also to wait sometimes for gasoline to come up. And sometimes we would clear an airport out, and German planes would land, didn't know we captured them. And so they'd be greeted by a jeep, a couple of jeeps with machine guns up.
What kinds of planes were these? Were these their fighters or just like
Fighters,
transport?
yeah, mostly, yeah. Not transport. So anyway, finally, it's warming up, and I got shot at, and I had taken a little nap right after I'd taken a message, and a couple of slugs come through the canvas on the top of the half track where my head and shoulders had been. I got really angry. I jumped out the back, told the guys to get in the ditch on the right side of the vehicle. I got up there in a turret, swung the machine gun around, fired in the woods, and told them to tell the commander when small arms fire. I heard a couple more shots. Later learned that the Jeep driver for the chaplain, who had red crosses all over his peep and also on the guy's arm and on his helmet, they put a slug right through the skin, his arm and one rib, and landed in the front of the Jeep. So much for the Geneva Conventions. So anyway, the gun jammed, and I picked up the driver's .45, and I fired about half of a cartridge or a magazine of that, and then a half track with 4 50 caliber machine guns come by and swept the woods. So I got to fire at the enemy, and I got to get mad. So anyway, shortly after that, or about that time, we started seeing dead bodies. along the road. And they were emaciated people in civilian clothes. Once in a while you'd see one that have a yellow diamond with a J in it, meaning he was a Jew. And this happened for a couple of days. It was overcast, and finally, after about the third day, early in the afternoon, we started seeing these civilians walking back down. They were emaciated. They were so poor physically that they looked like they had a perpetual smile on their face because the flesh on their cheeks and under their jaw was eroded. They were so thin that when the wind blew, you could see the outline, sort of a triangle of their femurs, and the inside, the flesh on the inside of their thighs was eroded away, and their clothes would blow there. At any rate, I stopped at this, we are a calm stop. I got out, and there was a clearing and a bunch of pine plantings, and there were a whole bunch of GIs there, including some guys in plain clothes that we determined to be counterintelligence corps. There was also over a dozen German prisoners. And also, the worst thing about it, there's a pile of bodies, probably 30 foot long and probably 3 to 4 feet high. And there were other political prisoners who were checking out the shoes of the dead bodies to see if they could find something better. So as we walked up there, there was a pile of German machine guns over to one corner of this clearing, and some of the political prisoners, about 3 of them, had machine guns, and they collared about 6 or 8 Nazi soldiers, marched them to the back of the clearing, down a little gully, and burp, burp, burp. They come back without the prisoners and stashed the guns. And so they had a little frontier justice there. So
Did you watch that happen, or you heard
no,
about
I
it?
couldn't see, I heard it.
You heard, okay.
Yeah. So at any rate, this was a death march, and there was something like 15,000 prisoners when we started out, and they slaughtered a whole bunch of them. I don't know what the figures are, but I have them in this sheet I have called miscellaneous extracts, and in there are the names of about 18 German soldiers, SS troops, who committed these atrocities, and we have the names of several political prisoners who would testify against them. So I don't know what happened to them, whether they went to Nuremberg or not, but I was not interested in that because it wasn't publicized among the GIs. So this made me really angry, and it's disgusting, and it just shows that when people think they're superior and they decide other people are subhuman and they have no rights, you know, it's a miserable thing. And this is one of the things that you have to be careful about the criminal justice system, is not to over-punish people and not to think they won't grow up. And it's the same thing you have to worry about at this time with our national defense and the emergency that George Bush created, and try and take away the rights of civilians.
Now, was this was in March of
No, this was in April, around 17th, 16th,
Okay.
17th, 18th of April, before we went to Beirut. And Beirut, where Bayreuth is, German, is the home of Richard Wagner, the big composer, and Adolf built a beautiful opera house for him. And I prowl that opera house in my dirty combat boots and carbine. So, scrounging, I didn't do a lot. My buddy Al Persiani found us a bench seat from a Mercedes that was wrecked, and we put this in the back of the half track. was much more comfortable than the cushions we had. Sparta became a big egg and chicken man, and he was forever confiscating a crock of salted eggs. And he had built a framework on a manifold where you could warm up sea rations by punching holes in them, and heat from the manifold would warm them up. So you'd have a hot meal at noon. He also discovered that you could use the biscuit can, put a little butter in it, put an egg in it, and you cook an egg in the manifold.
What happened to Sparta? Sounds like a pretty bright guy. I wonder what came of him later on in life.
I don't know. I lost track of him after the war. In fact, I lost track of all the guys.
Mhm.
Only guys I got in touch with was a guy named Eldon Grogg from Pontiac and a guy named Drury McCarthy.
Mhm.
I stood up, I was an usher at his wedding in Chicago,
Mhm.
52.
Oh, okay.
And I tried to call him on the phone. I got free or unlimited long distance. I couldn't get anybody.
Mhm.
He was out in Redwood City, California.
Mhm.
Dad had a construction company. So at the end of the war, we wound up at, I wound up at a place called Gallenokerchen, Austria, just north of Linz, Austria. And we captured Linz, Austria without a struggle.
Mhm.
And what we found was 2 concentration camps, Gusen and Mauthausen. And what they finally did, the Germans in the neighboring town said, we don't know anything about this. So they made the German civilians dress up in their best clothes. And they marched them out to the concentration camp, and there were something like 3,000 bodies there. They took tanks with dozer blades on, made huge pits. They took the tattooed numbers off the bodies they could find, and they forced the Germans, citizens, to pick those bodies up with their hands, no gloves, and dump them in this pit. And then they buried them. We also were the furthest east of any American unit, and we contacted the Russians about May about 5th at Amstetten on the north side of the Danube, and we captured our division, 11th Armored Division, captured 79,299 prisoners. Okay?
Mostly Germans?
All kinds.
Oh, okay.
And over 250,000 wanted to surrender us at the end of the war, and they were told to stay in place.
Mhm.
So the thing I forgot to tell you, do I have time?
You have about 9 minutes.
Okay, I got time to, okay. So, when we talk about captured prisoners, I had a unique experience. The war was almost over, and it was April 23rd. I'm going to change the sheet here.
Okay.
And we were in an armored column late in the afternoon. And we were outside of a town called, well, I forget the name of the town. Anyway, that was not too far from Reagan. Anyway, it was late in the afternoon, and we'd been sitting there for a while, and I had stomach cramps. So I grabbed a roll of toilet paper, and I looked up, and there was a little passageway and draw through a ridge that was wooded, and there was this path, enough you could drive a Jeep up if you wanted to. And I looked up there, and there was another ridge way on, but there was a meadow up there.
Mhm.
And I said, I better take the shovel and bury my feces because we might wind up camping up there for the night. So I went out in the woods there, went in a brush beside the trail and did my thing, and I got my pants buttoned, and I looked to the right, and up the trail coming toward me are 5 figures in brown which I quickly identified as Hungarian soldiers. I noticed that they had 3 white flags and 2 other flags, a Hungarian national flag and some sort of a regimental flag. So it was obvious to me they wanted to surrender. So I left the shovel and toilet paper, grabbed my carbine, went out in the trail and stood at port arms and motioned them to come on toward me. And then I turned my back on them because in the armored column I was in, it stretched for a couple, 3 miles, and we had like over 3,000 troops in there and lots of tanks and machine guns and artillery pieces, and I figured that these guys were probably hungry. The Germans hadn't fed them and may not even have any weapons or any money, any ammunition for their weapons.
Mhm.
So I walked up to the back of my half-track and motioned them to come toward me. When I got there, I motioned them to go up the front, toward the front of the column. And in front of me was the chaplain and his driver. There was a message center vehicle where they kept the decoding equipment, and then there was a radio vehicle that was in the what they call S3 net, which is another command net, and then the colonel in his Jeep was just in front of tactical air, which was a liaison from the Air Force to help direct the fire of P-38s and P-47s to strafe towns and enemy troops and knock out tanks and stuff. So at any rate, I walked up there to by the colonel. I motioned these soldiers to stop, and I said, "Colonel, sir," as I saluted, "these Hungarian officers look to me like they want to surrender some prisoners."
Mhm.
So I stuck around. I couldn't speak French very well, or German, or Hungarian. So the colonel summoned an interpreter, and as they started interrogating these guys, I decided I better go back and get the shovel. So that's what I did. And attached it to and got the toilet paper, and climbed aboard, and I told the guys what happened, and then they told me, "Scotty, you should have got their pistols, you know. You could sold them for $100 a piece."
Mhm.
I said, "You're right. I was just so excited I forgot to do that." So that was my adventure. I forgot all about it. I couldn't remember how many there were. So finally, a couple years ago, I found these after-action reports that were issued to me and other members of our unit in July of 1945. I kept them all these years. And I looked under the 23rd of April, and sure enough, it says 2,000 PWs Hungarian Kossuth Division. And so if you look on the map here, it says, shows Kossuth, K-O-S-S-U-T-H, Kossuth.
Mhm.
So that's my claim to fame.
Oh.
So it goes to show you, having stomach cramps at the right time, you never know what it's going to lead to.
We have about 2 minutes left. Is there anything
Okay,
else you want to
so,
say?
what I would like to talk about is that there's not enough recognition. The VJ Day, D-Day, VE Day,
Mhm.
Pearl Harbor, Battle of the Bulge, the closing of the Battle of Bulge, July or January 16, 45. They're not on the calendar. And
Mhm.
so the reason I'm doing this is to show that I was an eyewitness to an atrocity,
Mhm.
and these things should not be forgotten. And also, I'm proud of my division.
Mhm.
And we have a group called 11th Armored Division Association on the net. And you can tune in, or you can draw that up and find all about all the battles and all the things we did.
Mhm.
They still have conventions and I'm proud of my unit.
Mm-hmm. And are you in touch with them?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
good
I
deal.
submitted articles about this Hungarian business,
Mhm.
and they printed it.
Mhm.
And I did another one about I went back to visit the LST 510 with my grandsons and my daughter.
Mhm.
And they treated me royally, and they were impressed by what the LSTs did.
Mhm.
They landed troops, brought back prisoners and bodies.
Mhm.
And the LST I was on was at Omaha Beach
Mhm.
on D-Day. So that's why I'm here.
Okay, well, we're very glad you've been here. You've had a lot to say, a lot of very interesting stuff that people may be listening, watching and listening to you for quite some time.
Well, I hope so. I hope it goes down to the 393 and they can do something with it. I didn't realize I could talk that much.
That was a good, excellent stuff. Really good.